Welcome to Built Human. I'm Andrew. This is John. The world keeps moving faster and faster, but somehow our health keeps getting left behind. We're here working that out in real time, questioning everything and amplifying what actually works. Let's get into it. We've got a really exciting show today. Obviously, I'm biased because I get to be interviewed a little bit, give a little more on the background, but a couple more things as well in store here, a couple news articles, and of course, we'll talk about what we're actively working on. So, what's up first, John? First news article here.
Yeah, you
Exciting one.
introduced this as a Built Human podcast, but really this is the Andrew Coca podcast, at least today. But no, we'll cover a little bit of news to start, as we've had, some exciting events or a lot to process over the last few weeks since we last talked. So here's an interesting update. There was a study that came out of WSU recently, right? That examined 3,000 food groups to understand whether they met the FDA's new definition of healthy. Now, the FDA recently updated their definition of healthy to mandate a minimum amount from a suggested food group. That would be, fruits, vegetables, protein foods, etc., while staying within a specific per serving limit of added ingredients, so added sugars, added fats, etc. And so what happened here was Washington State University took those guidelines and analyzed 3,000 foods against the FDA's guidelines. And these were foods the FDA are already deemed healthy, to see what percent of those foods actually wound up being healthy. And the results were remarkable, with only about 14% meeting the new updated standards of healthy, meaning 86% of what we've been told of healthy foods are no longer healthy. What, I don't know. You read this, Andrew. What was your take on this in your first glance?
I mean, I get a little bit of sticker shock with this one, but I honestly, because it's so striking, the fact that and a self audit by your own standard, 86% are failing, but at the same time, didn't we know this? And so it's actually nice to see this and to see something take an evaluation of a basic standard of health and apply it retroactively. But I think it speaks to a lot of what we touch on, where marketing and standards have been bankrupt for so long, right? Because if not the FDA, what is supposed to tell you what is a healthy standard? Yet, if 86% are failing, how do you trust anything the FDA is going to tell you is healthy? If by its own measurements, its own new standards, it's taking that and saying, well, actually, almost everything that passes is unhealthy. So we pass things that are unhealthy. Therefore, we might pass things that are air quote safe, but if they're not healthy, how safe are they? So there's just friction in the whole thing. And I think it speaks to what we've known but struggled to quantify. And I like to see it quantified like this. I really enjoy that it's catching up and kind of demonstrating what we've all been saying for so long.
Yeah. I think probably one of the most interesting parts of this article is understanding the breakdown on why these foods actually don't meet the limits, right? Because when we talk about containing a minimum amount of recommended food group, that's not really that hard to do, right? And I feel like a lot of kids brands within this food space often do that with their berry flavored something or other, right? They pretend that it's fruit forward or made up of a majority of fruits while still containing a higher amount of additives, like we discussed with fats and sodium, etc. And so I'll direct to this and screen share this part of the article we have here, but here's the most interesting excerpt. High sodium and saturated fats, often added during the food processing and cooking, were the most common disqualifiers. So the new rule makes an exception for some nutrient-dense foods, but the most common qualifiers being added fats, right? And so when we think about a slice of deli meat, a handful of crackers, a can of soup, all of these actually exceed the FDA, the new FDA guidelines as far as added fats and added sodiums, right? All of these are preservatives, artificial preservatives meant to preserve shelf life, make things last longer. And of course, obviously, if you have chicken in a can as part of chicken noodle soup, well, you really shouldn't trust that chicken for long, right? What makes it last on a shelf for years versus in your fridge for about a week, maybe
Yeah.
maximum, right? And
Yeah, I
I
mean,
think that that's where this is really telling, is
yeah,
reading those exact words.
exactly, and I line it up to some of the other studies we've seen come through, like, one of them was saying a quarter or even a third of calories in a US diet were coming from soybean oil or the like, right? Like, a
Hmm.
lot of the additive excess fats from some of these processed uh, seed oils and other bad things that are added onto the food, that it then ceases being real food and becoming processed fake food. That's what we're eating. And to your point, that's what led this study to flag all of these things, is because
Right.
it's hard to find a staple product that isn't processed in this manner these days. It really is only the real foods that lack this type of processing. So I think, I mean, it speaks to why we're so, why real food and natural living are our benchmarks, right? Real food. If it's real food and it hasn't been processed in this way, it's almost certainly not going to fall under this 86%. And I
Right.
think that's the core, is like, well, you may not know what is and isn't going to fall there. You may not know what is and isn't healthy when you have to be really complicated, but you can simplify this, boil it down to real food. And if you stuck to real food and that's what was on your plate, you can pretty much trust that it's not going to fall under these things that we're catching. So it's
And
complicated, but it's also fairly simple when you actually stick to the values that we hold.
And that's one of the biggest things we preach here at Animal Base, right? And I think when we were working through our brand vision, what we really wanted to hold on to and grip as a business, but also a community, is this idea of real food, real ingredients, natural living, right? And if you follow that dialect of real food and real ingredients, really, it's not that complicated when you talk about diet, and shouldn't be that complex. Now, where I think this is finally starting to take a turn is breaking down the idea of healthy, because we've been told these things are healthy for so long because there are healthy portions of it, right? If you take something that is largely derived of fruits, but still has over 10% of the daily value of added fats and other chemicals in it, again, that negates the health aspect of that food, right? And so that's kind of what it looks like the FDA is trying to establish, which I can really appreciate. I think part of that goes into this next portion of the article too, right? Where we talk about the sodium and fat that the FDA is flagging. It's not actually the ones in your kitchen, not the raw materials, the right foods, the real foods that you're talking about. When we talk about the sodium that is disqualifying 80% of American foods, for instance, it is sodium nitrate in deli meats, sodium phosphate in processed cheese and chicken products, right? And sodium glutamate, can't even pronounce it, right? As a flavor enhancer.
Another good
So
rule of thumb, no?
rule of thumb, you can't pronounce it, it shouldn't go in your body. It's that simple. Um, and it goes on to say here, the saturated fat allows the same pattern that the FDA is capping isn't the fat in grass-fed steak. It's refined palm oil, hydrogenated vegetable fats, and rendered animal fat from commodity operations processed at high heat. This is very important, right? Processed at high heat, stripped of nutritional cofactors, and added back to the products for texture and shelf stability in quantities that bear no relationship to what that food would naturally contain. So all of a sudden, you're taking a natural chicken product, injecting it with all of these fats to increase shelf life, and it is no longer just pure chicken. It is injected, modified pure chicken, no matter how it was raised.
Terrible.
I think an important part that the study also goes into is varying costs too, right? So when here's another excerpt directly from WSU Insiders, but beyond availability, cost is a key factor in food choices. The researchers also compared the price of qualifying and non qualifying items and found that qualifying items had a lower median cost per serving, but higher costs per calorie. It's cheaper to meet daily energy needs with calorie rich, nutrient poor foods. So, this begs a really interesting question, right? Like, I think a lot of the nutritional discourse on social media, the fitness discourse, has been calories in versus calories out, right? And now we're starting to take a different turn that, well, not all calories count the same. it's kind of, when I read this excerpt, it has the same idea of a bag of chips, right? High calorie, but when you think about cost per serving, the servings of the calories, it's often a much higher serving, right?
Yeah.
Um, and you can eat that whole bag of chips, and all of a sudden you're maxing out your calories, and you're eating a ton of servings, and you're still feeling hungry because you're not eating real food. So when we talk about nutritional value, the cost per actual, um, what did it say here? Serving of foods being much lower, that's actually very important. Because I think one of my reactions here is a lot of people are going to think, oh, I'm going to be hungrier because I'm not consuming nearly as many calories. But when you talk about this idea of empty calories, which is a whole nother discussion, like that is where we really begin to kind of decipher the science a little bit, and what satiates you as a human, and what equals a balanced diet or should equal a real diet, right?
Yeah, I think it's a really easy to open a can of worms with calories in out, because
Yep.
it's one of those things where if you say that inside of the health community and even the animal-based community, there's so many different arguments happening, and almost everyone is right when approaching it from their frame of reference and in a different angle, because it's always yes, but. And then there's always technically there's the law of thermodynamics, and then
Right.
you get into, hey, but what about how thermodynamics happens inside of the body in a way you're not considering? But then we haven't measured that incredibly, and then there's also that bioindividuality where people will process things differently than others, and so then it comes back to, hey, the way you can trust definitely what you're doing is by the calorie number and by optimizing what the type of calorie is. So I think no matter how these debates play out, it's always like, well,
Yep.
hey, maybe you ought to try to optimize both depending on what your goals are. But then I think the best thing I've seen is people kind of tend to fall away from needing to measure calories as long as they have really good inputs, if they don't really have a goal of either gaining weight or losing weight. But
Right.
then the second you do have one of those goals, it's like optimize both. So it's a can of worms when you start to talk about calories, but I think on a basic level related to this article, to your point,
Yeah.
it's it's really telling when you introduce the caloric argument to this, because when you are adding calories and track, it's especially like you said, when it comes to the cost per calorie
Right.
as well, I think that kind of puts the nail in the coffin in this thing, because I think we can all agree that if you really wanted to track cost per calorie, if the way you're going to get that down is by toxic fake foods, I think it's common sense that you don't just want to get the calories right when this is the method of doing so. I think that's common sense. It should be common sense that this is not how you do that.
Yep. Exactly. This is going to be interesting. I think it's the right move for the FDA to make, especially to save face a little bit. It's, again, interesting that it took us this long. Thankful that we're getting somewhere and being able to better identify what criteria goes into nutritious foods, real foods, right? Um, and so, what I don't want this to become is another organic label that you can beat around the bush, or another health label that you can beat around the bush with, right? And they are developing a new label specifically for meeting this new standard of healthy. So, I'm sure we're going to have this conversation again when that's all finalized, and saying, well, where did they miss, right? Where did
Yeah.
creative big brands, big CPG companies find a loophole? Um, and so something about this as well that's super interesting is this mandate won't kick in until sometime in 2028. I believe it's February or March of 2028. And until then, it's completely voluntary for CPG brands. And so, what does that mean? Well, by the time anyone notices this article or notices the findings and really dives into understanding that it's not saturated fats that are all bad, not all saturated fats are bad. We know that, right? But it's the additives that go into these types of foods that change the complexity of the food and the actual build of the food. Like, by the time we realize this, and by the time it actually does become a mandate, it's too late, right? So I'm hopeful that, at least just talking about this in the discourse that we do raises some awareness for what you're actually putting in your body. There's always a good, better, best model, but even when you're in that better, there's still a lot of trade-offs that need to be made, consciously. Consciously.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I think probably time to move on from this one because I could probably talk more, especially when you open the calorie in and out can of worms. I mean, we'll touch on that a little bit in the talking
Yeah.
about some of what I've learned through my journey, but it's just such a debate starter, right? Because
Yep.
you could go to any health and wellness community, ours included, and you could ask someone how they feel about calories, and without fail, you can start a debate with almost anyone. And
Yeah.
probably one of the more passionate debates that everyone will have an opinion on. It's a surefire way to do so, I think. So
Yep. Yep. You're absolutely right. So we'll pivot here. I'm biting my own tongue to stop talking about calories itself as well. Um, but I know this is episode 2, Andrew, and we're a brand new brand. We're a brand new podcast, and people want to know who you are, why Built Human, why this platform animal based, right? Like, so there's a lot to learn about you. We'll talk about the entrepreneurial side. We'll get into the knee injury a little bit, the recovery, and how you change your frame of reference. But let's just start simple, right? Before we get into all of it, like, what did life actually look like for you 4, 5, 6 years ago? We're not talking about like necessarily health wise, but as specifically in terms of building companies, the stresses that come with it. You've talked about yourself as a CEO and entrepreneur on the previous show. Um, so talk to me a little bit about that. What did life look like for you back in 5, 6 years ago?
yeah, I've had times where there's been more intense work periods and maybe less intense work periods, but one of the overarching things over the last decade or so was that there was always an accountability where the buck stopped with me as an entrepreneur. And so I would say the stress of entrepreneurship has probably been the theme of 10 years, where there's people counting on you, right? Like even from day one, I hired my first real estate agent back in the day. I had a real estate sales team, hired my first agent before I could legally go and buy my first drink at a bar. And so from an early age, having this responsibility of not just my own mouth and family's mouths to feed, but taking care of a community and a collective. And, that, to give you a little bit of background and the audience a little bit of background of on that evolution, I'll just say we started selling real estate. I had a background in entrepreneurship. I went to Babson College, which is, of course, as you know, as you were there with me, the number one entrepreneurship school in the world. And so we had this entrepreneurial spirit and drive and it's largely technology, right? You want to build technology, but then there's also other ways to innovate non-technically, maybe consumer brands and elsewhere. You don't typically think sales in real estate or sales in a traditional intrapreneurship method. So I think what I got when I went and started that real estate group was a lot of really professional people working with a lot of purpose and a lot of structure, a lot more structure than we had at the entrepreneurship school with the entrepreneurs. And so the way that evolved was we grew our team to about 30 real estate agents in our group. And learning the real estate industry, we kept going, oh my God, we need to solve a bigger problem, not just sell real estate. And so the entrepreneur side kicked in and we started a company called Showingly, which was a technology product to innovate on home access. And ultimately, to speed that up a little bit, the story, I suppose, we had a friend of ours take over Showingly because we were struggling to break into the market, selling to organizations called MLSs. We just didn't know what we didn't know at the time. And we were able to pull our team out, our tech team, and start a company called Modern.tech, which is a software services firm. And so if you asked me 5 years ago what we were doing, that was right around the time we were running Showingly, which was our first foray into technology entrepreneurship, raising venture capital money, raising friends and family money. And this was right before we kind of pulled our tech guys out and started the software contracting. So actually, starting at the 5 or 6 year point was probably the hardest time, I would say, of my whole life, because though we've had ups and downs, and though we've had problems face us, that 5 year ago, 6 year ago mark was definitely the worst. I mean, at one point, for example, we were working 100-hour work weeks nonstop without fail, because as the leadership, at least, and especially the devs were building product, but we were also facing that stress of not just sales, but fundraising. And at one point, it got so bad, I think, that we owed vendors money. Like, we were late on paying our bills, but then we also had to convince new investors to give us money that would immediately pay those bills off, but then also convince them why they should invest in us for forward looking for the future. And so the duality of that pressure, living with that day to day, and having some of those times where it was almost like gun to your head, you have to survive, you have to figure it out, you have to find a way, there is no excuse. I think also being early 20s trying to figure that out was especially challenging, right? Because through normal life, you have your parents to look to, you have in school your teachers or your advisors, but in entrepreneurship, especially as a founder, as a CEO, there's no one else to go to, right? You are where the buck stops. And so living in those times with those stressful hours, with those just crazy, you have to do it or risk everyone's livelihood moments. And you have to find a way, even if it's not a traditional way. You can't just look it up on the internet for how you're going to figure out a problem. You have to get creative at times, right? That's the kind of thing that I think day in and day out of that was just really incredibly challenging to handle. So, I know we'll talk about what that does to somebody, but for sure at the time, I knew nothing about health, right? Like, my concept of health was go to the gym. And so at the time, you get stressful. I consider myself a stress eater. I have a sweet tooth. And so, what better to do at midnight with your co-founders than, drink a beer or order chicken shawarma to the office and have, we used to do this thing, for example, where it would be like 10 p.m. and we would order from a local Mediterranean place. We'd get like cartons of pita bread to the office because there was this loophole on, I think it was DoorDash, where you could get like a 50-cent pita bread order, but it would come with like five pitas. So we'd get like $40 of pita bread, and it would come in these giant cartons, and we would get Chick-fil-A sauce. Like, we'd buy it online and just have Chick-fil-A sauce. And then we would like dip the pita bread in Chick-fil-A sauce for like another 3 hours all night long while we worked. Like, these were the kind of things we did to enjoy ourselves a little bit, right? And so, couple that with some of the stresses, and it definitely does a number on you over years and years.
So safe to say you're a former seed oil fan is what it sounds like.
For sure. I mean, like, I was probably eating a third of my diet on seed oils, like the average American diet. You know what I mean? It was
Totally.
for sure.
So I think you talk about the stressors a lot, right? And building a company comes with mental stress, comes with physical stress. You talk about how your diet was poor, your idea of being healthy was exercising. And when we think about the three main pillars of life over here at Animal Base and in within built human ecosystem, we think the ability to eat, your diet, right? Ability to live, which is all the in between, what you wash yourself with, what you cook with, etc., just what you need to survive. And three is your ability to rest and re-energize and take time off and not work 100 hours a week, right? And I think there's a competitive spirit, and knowing you very well, there's a competitive spirit where 100 hours a week is thriving, but that is also just not humanly true for um, at a persistent pace. So, working through all of this, at what point did your body start pushing back? It was a lot of slow accumulation. At what point did you know, okay, like I need to focus on this a little bit more?
Well, I think that it's easy to build momentum in a positive and in a negative sense. So I think the times I did the worst was when things could spiral. Like, for example, there were times where I had injuries, right? Where if I stopped going to the gym, but then I didn't change the way I ate, well, all of a sudden, right, you're not exercising, you are eating poorly, and you are stressed out. And so things can quickly start to get out of hand. And I would say that before any of my injuries and before w- times where maybe I wouldn't work out, well, you can kind of mask one or two problems with one or two positives, right? I think it's a lot harder when they start to downward spiral. And so, you mentioned that I had an injury, and probably about 5 years ago it was now, maybe 6 years ago, I had a knee injury where my knee buckled, it like a rug slid out and my knee buckled, and I tore my ACL fully. I tore my PCL and MCL and meniscus. I had all four. I did the major knee blowout, and I had to have surgery and then another surgery, and that whole process for years. I probably gained 55 pounds, I think it was. I gained a lot of weight, and at the time I knew nothing about health. Like I said, my concept of health was working out, and so with that injury it was like, well, can't really work out. I guess I could bench press, right? But like couldn't do a ton, couldn't play hockey, couldn't do any of the things that I really enjoyed doing. So during that time, right, you take someone like me who kind of stress eats, has a sweet tooth, that type of thing, doesn't know anything about health, so eating a ton of seed oils, um, working crazy hours, right? So not getting sunlight, not getting my feet on the earth, not doing anything good for myself, right? And I think that's when that downward spiral is really when it started to hit me.
That I remember that very clearly, and as your friend going through that, because it was a process of conjunction between the program and also business pressures all at the same time, right? Um, how would you say the process was finding? I don't want to say hope's the wrong word, but being enlightened a little bit by more than just exercise, right? I know you talk about this frequently in our private conversations about how you found Ben Patrick and he
Mhm.
changed your perspective on medicine, recovery tactics, physical fitness, and also diet to an extent, just being within that community. Talk about your recovery and what you found in Ben Patrick's practices.
Yeah, that was really an eye opener because at the time, right, I my concept of how to recover was, okay, my surgeon said this, sent me to a physical therapist who said that, and I started doing all the things that people were telling me, and it just wasn't working. And when they also start to give you these broad condemnations, I sometimes, granted, it is what it is. But when they tell me, hey, you're very likely going to have arthritis, you're very likely not going to play hockey anywhere near where you were because of the way it's not really progressing. Here's what we can do to make it a little bit better. When they start to say these like life changing, altering statements that are going to define how you're going to live the rest of your life, that's when there was this part of me that just went, I know I can be different. I know that whatever they're telling me is my sentence is something that I can get around. And now, not all the time is that going to be the case, I suppose, because we are all, after all, built human. That being said, though, the part of me that was thinking not just that I'm special, it was thinking that there's something that's gotta be out there, that's gotta work, that they don't know about because they have this narrower frame of reference from what they've been taught, and they're not God. They don't know everything, right? So is there a way I can find more information that might help me break through this barrier? And so that thought, what I've often found in my journey as an entrepreneur as well, is when you start to think like that is usually when you start to have a breakthrough, because it's like that quote where problems are only as great as the frame of reference from which they were created. I'm probably butchering an Einstein quote or something, but it's a level of thinking you have where the problems exist. And if you can think differently and reframe and find a blank slate to build context and problem solving from, you might be able to solve things without the constraints that created the framing of the problem. And so taking it back to health, right? The second I started to think like that is, I think maybe within 3 days, I found Ben Patrick and his concept of knees over toes, which turned the model on its head because even my physical therapists were saying, don't put your knees over your toes. That's too much stress on the knees. That's going to be bad for you. Start with the hips, start building muscle around the area. But Ben Patrick's thing was build from the ground up, strengthen from the feet upwards, the toes upwards, right? Do exercises that build from the ground up and prioritize getting your knees over your toes. Also prioritize a handful of other things like getting blood flow into the middle of the knee, things that my physical therapist and surgeon didn't even consider, right? And I actually, this is a whole nother topic, but I had recently torn my labrum, shoulder labrum, and went back to my surgeon. He asked me about the knees, and I said, "Hey, do you know about knees over toes guy?" And he's like, "Who?" And I tried to describe some of the exercises I was doing. He's like, "Yeah, I've never heard anything like that." And I was like, "Okay, I'm going to leave it alone." But the fact that some of these guys don't know these things is mind blowing to me. And so I found that. And here's the crazy part, right? Is it wasn't just theory. I was desperate. I was desperate to do something. And so I was experimenting and trying, and I tried this. And I swear to you, within 2 days of doing reverse out knee pain protocol from him, I could do my day to day life without pain. And I'm talking like going up and down stairs used to have pain if I pushed it. Maybe if I tried 2 steps at a time, that kind of thing, right?
Mhm.
Little things throughout the day, no more pain. So then I thought, okay, what if I got back on the ice? Because anytime I tried to skate, I'd be in pain for 3 or 4 days after
Right.
skating. Went back, played, and I think the game was maybe a week after I started doing the protocol. And so after 7 days, I got back on the ice, no pain skating. Woke up the next morning thinking, here it comes again, but no pain the next day. And from that point on, no pain ever again. Ever again to this day, no pain. And granted, I do incorporate these things into my routine on a day-to-day basis, but it completely changed my life, that type of protocol. And so, to your point, when did you start going down some of this rabbit hole and thinking that type of way about other things? That was definitely the moment that caused me to think that way, right? And that's when I started looking at other things, looking at, hey, Ben Patrick, he probably thinks this way. Who does Ben Patrick follow and hang out with? Um, that type of thing. He was on Joe Rogan. He did content with Paul Saladino. I think I actually maybe even found Paul Saladino because I was following Ben Patrick. Might be making that up, but it's that type of thing, right?
Yeah.
I found content in people who thought in a way that I thought, and I'm not just going to blankly accept everything obviously he or people who he was with are saying, but it was a good starting point, right? Is a good way to kind of orient in the right direction and start to go down that path.
Totally makes sense. And when you think of Ben's program, right, and everything you learned, do you one you mentioned you still practice it today? Is it more of a now proactive stance rather than reactive? I think when you found him, it was reactive, right? And how's that program working for you still to this day in practice? How do you implement it to make sure that you are strengthening from the ground up?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get lazy sometimes, and it's not like I do it religiously every day, but it's second nature to the point where if I'm in a setting where I'm getting ready for a warm up or working out, I by habit I do it. And I think in the
Awesome.
back of my head, I don't think I'm scared that my knee will be hurt again if I don't do it, but I think I just know that that's the way life is. You have to be consistent. You have to have good routines and good habits. And whether it's that old knee injury or a new one, you definitely want to be proactive. And so it's funny because you shouldn't have to wait for the injury to make a
Right.
change in your life, right? And I think a lot of people go, "Oh, I don't need to do X, Y, and Z because I'm doing fine. I feel fine. I don't care about that right now." But then if they were to get injured, they would care a lot, right? And so where's the balance? Because it's not so black and white. And I think the balance is that there are good things you can do in your routines that are almost like prehab or prevention that make you more athletic, more fit. And so I always recommend taking some of Ben Patrick's stuff for anybody. And so one of the things I do is if I'm going to go and run on a treadmill or go for a run, go do any leg type of workout, if I'm at the gym, I just kind of by habit get on the treadmill and do a backwards walk. So I definitely think it's good to take an approach of building it in proactively. And yeah, every day when I go to the gym to do this, I definitely do build it in that manner as best I can. Now, a whole nother question is, do you go to the gym every day? So of course, if I'm only doing it when I'm going to the gym and then I'm not consistent with the gym, well then we have a whole host of other problems. So I don't think it's good to necessarily fixate on any one thing so deeply, but definitely it's become second nature to make sure that I'm building it in.
Awesome. Makes total sense. Building in the right practices too. I think when I consider even just like going for a run or a gym, I completely forego stretching, and that I pay for it, right? So having the right routine is actually very important, and people overpass that a lot. Okay, so let's pivot a little bit here. So we've talked about how Ben Patrick's programs were great for your physical health. Now, when did you start pulling that thread into other areas of life? Most more specifically, nutrition, right? That's another passionate area of yours,
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I tinkered around a little bit, I would say, with originally, that's why I say the calorie in and out is a can of worms, is because I
right?
remember I first started doing this low calorie diet where I was trying to lose some of the weight I had gained. And though I actually did end up losing like 15 pounds from doing it, which is great and I think very helpful, it's like really at the expense of prioritizing nothing anywhere else, like just the calories. Is that really the answer? Like
Yep.
it felt wrong. And I'm not going to say that I felt so much better or worse doing it or not doing it, but I think the part of me that goes, what is the truth? Like where does the truth lie? Just instinctually, I knew that sacrificing everything but calories and holding only the calories as the number to hit was just not the truth of the matter. But I think that was also, and we'll touch on this I'm sure later, but also I don't want to say calories were bad to implement, because especially for somebody wanting to lose weight, well it's like, yeah, you should definitely go to a caloric deficit if you want to lose weight. It's just common sense at some point. I think the people who argue for the calorie in and out being the holy grail, like they're obviously not wrong about that, and I think they're so up in arms because I want to say they think that that's being questioned when you question calorie model at all. So but I think just the idea that you should only worry about that and nothing else is kind of where I started and then gradually moved away from, the more that I started to learn about things like the seed oils, for example, and the more that I followed some of the content from people doing elimination diets like carnivore or just an animal-based diet generally, reading some of those types of books like the books by Sean Baker and Paul Saladino, and learning about that was also really revealing because it played into a lot of what I had done in past years, right? In the maybe 5 or 10 year ago version of myself when I was dieting, I tried, for example, paleo diet. I've tried the keto diet to lose weight. And I think the bigger thing, like I'll just end with this, is those were diets. They were a means to an end, right? The calorie in and out thing I tried, it was a means to an end. None of them were intellectual frameworks, ways of life, ways of evaluating reality around you and creating meaning and making decisions. That's what was different about doing an animal based diet, really a diet focused on real food. It wasn't just diet, right? It was also the natural living component. It was this way of life that was based on what we believe to be truth and doing what's best for your body, for others. And that's why when you're going to do what's best for your body, it's not about a means to an end. It's about a way of living day to day in and day out. That's why this was different. You know, even though I do want to continue to lose weight and I am, it's not a means to an end. That's probably why I haven't lost the weight necessarily as fast as I could have if I were doing simply a strict calorie deficit diet and simply prioritizing nothing else. Because I'm not necessarily trying to eat nothing every day. I'm trying to build good routines and good foundations and good fundamentals. And I feel really great right now doing that. But I think that's the subtle paradigm shift, right? It's not a means to an end. And I think that's the biggest thing that changed the way I approached everything I was doing with health.
And how much do you prioritize the sourcing, right, of what you put in your body? Because you've talked about all of these diets that have either helped you or hurt you, right, in some way or another. But I think I have a perspective on this, especially when we talk about inflammatory ingredients, right? Like, how much did this shape the actual ingredients and sourcing of the products that you are deciding to consume?
Yeah, it for a long time became kind of the number one priority for me was to understand the quality and the source of where I was getting everything I had as staples, whether it was meat or chicken or eggs or dairy, right? Because if you're getting it from some of these commercial production lines, and if you're getting, for example, the traditional eggs from the grocery store, like you start to see some of how these practices are. It's not just worse for the animal. I think what a lot of people don't realize is it's also worse for the human eating the animal. And so whether you are very selfish in that regard and you don't really care about the animal even, well, it's still not good for you. You know, if you want what's best for the animal and you want to be kind of in tune with the natural living, natural law where, you know, you give thanks to the animal kind of thing. Well, great. It's best for them and it's best for you that the way that the welfare that we treat our livestock with when we're going to eat animal products, it matters, right? And so when you look at, for example, grass fed beef versus grain fed, I think there's also a lot of debate on, hey, does it matter that much? Should I now not eat grass fed beef? And I think that's where you're talking earlier about, you know, good, better, best type of model, right? I think, need to have this balance of not being fear mongering and not being too rigid, because part of the art of this on the journey is to not make this false expectation that you already have to be at the end of the journey when you start the journey. And I think that it puts a lot of people off when all of these expectations get set so heavily, so early. It doesn't let the journey unfold very well for people. And I think that everyone needs to have that journey unfold a little bit more naturally. There is a starting point, and that starting point is never the end. So that's why I think, you know, we can't be so rigid in so black and white. And sometimes people will call me rigid in black and white because in my personal life, I'll make this decision like, oh my God, I'm not going to buy that. It just bothers me. I don't want to buy it. But there's a difference between, do I want to make a choice given the information in front of me? And do I need to tell people that they have to make that same choice? Right? Because the context of their circumstances may be far different than mine. And I think that's where, when people get preachy in black and white, I think they don't realize that you're not supposed to be scared of like non grass fed beef. You're not supposed to be scared of like pasteurized milk if you're one of those people who just likes to drink the raw milk. Now, obviously, everyone's like, oh, no benefit, blah, 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 whatever. But the point being, they're doing the same thing in reverse now. Like, stop making everyone so scared. Like, you're not supposed to be afraid. You're supposed to
Right.
be unfolding this journey of like testing for yourself
Right.
and trying to get better every single day. And I
Right.
think if we support each other in that, there's a lot less of this, oh, well, you have to do it this way. And, you know, if anything, when people are telling you you have to do something a certain way, Like they're not telling you, right? They're telling themselves because they need to believe that to justify the actions they're taking. So I don't know that I'll get off my soapbox on this one, but definitely very strongly opinionated there.
No, it's a great point, and honestly, I'm going to put you right back on that soapbox, right? So, because there's a version of this story, and in your story specifically, and all this content that you want to share with people, where you keep it to yourself, right? You recover from the injury, you go back to hockey again, and you move on, and you keep operating as the CEO of many different businesses under Evolved, under Modern.tech, under Source RE, right? The businesses that you've brought to the table already. So why share this story? Why start building this new business? Like what made you feel like other people needed to know exactly what you're saying right now?
Yeah, it's a good question because part of the reservation I had was I had kind of become very reclusive and not wanted to be in front of a camera and be in the public eye at all. I think an earlier version of myself, my 20-year-old version of myself, had this dream to be an influencer. I had all these like mentors that were YouTube stars, and I built, like, for example, this training program for my real estate team, and I built this self-development program, and I was putting these videos out, and I really wanted to live that lifestyle. But that was not ultimately for others deep down. I think that was for me. And there was some ego involved in that, right? And so when I ultimately let that go and I didn't need that anymore, it actually was a very like daunting and frustrating prospect to think it might be best to go back in front of the camera. And part of what led me there was when I went to the animal based gathering in Costa Rica last year, and I was in this community of people who, not just eating animal based and carnivore and all that, but it was really just people who, like I said, didn't see health and diet as a means to an end. They saw it was a value system. It was a pursuit of truth and natural law, natural living, and shared human connection, right? And we were in the sun all day long. We were being active. We were just enjoying community. And we were obviously also eating in a very healthy way. I like they, for example, at the property took all the LED lights and replaced them with like circadian lighting, red lights, so that even if you were hanging out when the sun went down, you weren't staying wide awake. You could pass out right when you went back to your room and get up and do things the next day. A lot of really cool stuff there. And I just kept thinking to myself, this human experience, this this what we were doing is so much the antithesis of what I do on a day to day with AI and technology and building things. And it just kind of dawned on me that where I believe we should exist as a business is not just cutting edge tech. It's this marriage of like the duality, right? There's the cutting edge tech, and then there's that deep human experience. And I didn't want to leave the humanity behind. And so I just thought to myself, our model, we have a software development company. We can build whatever we want for ourselves, not just for clients. We can start any business we want. We have a couple businesses in the real estate technology space. And I just thought the next business I want to start is going to use technology to make this shared humanity, this journey, more accessible to people. And I want to build something that I would use, that as I went through this journey, I'm struggling with A, B, and C, right? Well, if I had a solution that helped me do X, Y, and Z, well, maybe I would have struggled less. And so I just thought to myself, this space is growing, which is good from a business perspective. I believe there's truth to this movement, which is good from a longevity perspective and really just kind of a filling your cup as a person and an entrepreneur perspective. And so I thought, let's build one home base for this movement, right? That was animal based. That's the marketplace and knowledge base and one place for all the thought leaders. And why don't we just get involved? Because we should be pushing this forward. So it let me kind of clarify what we're doing with all of our businesses in a better sense, right? It's like on one edge, it's AI technology, it's being at the cutting edge of innovation. Now, the other sense, it's like prioritize humanity and health and vitality and try to make that more accessible to people. So I don't know if Animal Base is the only startup we'll ever make to that end, right? But it kind of clarified the purpose of the duality of I felt where our company was going. And so when I realized that we were going to start a brand like that, it was like, well, the best way to do that type of brand is to go back in front of the camera and to kind of get over wanting to be out of the public eye. And for a few months in planning, right, it was like, hey, are you really willing to do this? You're not the most fit person leading a health and wellness brand, right? You're not necessarily at the end of your journey. You don't look like Paul Saladino. You don't look like half of these guys that have the washboard abs, and you're not even tan. Why are you talking about getting sunlight, right? So it's like when I was going to do this, it was like, you know what, man, 99% of the people watching these videos are not either. And they're probably looking at the mountain they have to climb to get there. And it's just daunting. And if I have to hold myself to that standard before I can even talk about it, well, then no one's going to talk about it. No one's going to join the community. No one's going to help each other to get there if they think that it's only for the people at the end of the journey. I think it's just such a mistake to think that way. And so when I kind of let go of some of those limiting beliefs and I just kind of knew that the people who had some of these self-limiting beliefs were going to start commenting and hating on me for doing that. But like, remember, people are going to tell you things for themselves. They're not telling you for you. And so I think when I let all that go and I realized this was going to be the best move, I was genuinely excited once again to get back in front of the camera. And I'm not a bad speaker. I speak at real estate conferences for our tech businesses, right? So I'm not terrible at this, but it's like it's very exposing, right? It's
Yeah.
you have to be comfortable with people seeing you and maybe not seeing you at your best, and maybe you're going to say weird things, or maybe you're going to look funny. Um, Maybe you're going to hate the way you hear yourself talking, but you just got to get over it. And so that was a nice 6 months of prep for me to just start doing this again, to be honest.
Yeah, totally. And so you've described yourself as a tech founder. Obviously, you've built quite a few businesses in the tech space. Some still around, some sold off, and moved on from. Um, as a tech founder, how do you, building a health based business, and but having your story start within the health space that with your own experimentation, how has this journey building animalbase.com shifted the way that you think about the health space? And I want you to especially think about here too how there's a lot of people that come up from the health side of things with the education as trainers, dietitians, MDs, and the like that come into the space and grapple or really struggle with the idea of technology as a solution. So how has building this business changed your idea of the health landscape and possibly change it for the better?
Well, a lot of what people do when they're health and wellness founders or influencers is they'll use the tech systems available to them. Like you could use Shopify out of the box to build a website, and you could use maybe some of these new trainer apps where you can have your own app or you can have your own program or course or things like this. But in our experience building tech with our company, Modern.tech, we can build custom web applications, mobile applications, databases, APIs, infrastructure, AI, right? And
Right.
uh, so I just thought, like, what could we do that is unique to what we do on a day to day with our tech team? How can we build something from scratch that isn't just leveraging another platform out of the box to give us another advantage in when we're going to enter the health space, right? Use our strengths. And if health and following wasn't our strength and tech was our strength, what could we technically do? And so that's why we did a custom implementation of a few things, and we did a hybrid as well using some things out of the box. And in the end, we were able to take a marketplace where we can sell all these other brands in the marketplace in a way that would have been really hard to do for anyone who wasn't building a custom solution. And I think that's what's nice. It gives us a leg up on anyone else who is doing the same thing, because they would have had to hire devs. Devs are not their expertise. Managing devs and building tech is not the easiest thing in the world. And so I think using our strength there was really nice. That was a, really crazy process to go through too, because there's balance of what actually is good for you as you're going through your journey, and then what is good for a business that you want to build, you want to make money, you want to grow. And so there's a few things in animalbase.com that I think are not really money makers, but that I think are really valuable, that I would use day to day, that I hope people will find valuable. Like when we, for example, made a knowledge base and put over 100 scientific research papers in there. Well, hey, whenever I would talk to my friends and family and they would go, "There's no science," or they'd be like, "The science is settled and it says blah," It's like, well, no, no, it's not. And here's 100 research papers that say otherwise, right? I think that kind of thing would have been so valuable for me to have, and that's why I wanted to build it. But it's not like we're selling it. It's not like it's going to
Yeah.
make us money, right? I think another one is the thought leader directory, right? It's like, not selling it, not going to make us money, but wow, wouldn't it have been nice if I could filter and find people that could have helped me on my journey, right? Like the Ben Patricks of the world. So I think that kind of thing is the balance we're striking there. But I think by doing some of the things that don't make you money, that's how you preserve the heart of the site, and the mission itself, right? Is
Yeah.
if everything was only to make money, I think people get a little fatigued. And so while the money will be a reflection of how much value you're adding, you also cannot only make it about the money when you're trying to build something that is meant to help people. You have to have that balance. And I think we're doing our best. And I think so far we're refining our footing, right? So, but it's been a process and we're so early on, but I've enjoyed it a lot. It's not like most things we do in the tech space. I'll give you that for sure. It's way different.
Yeah. And this story reminds me a lot of um, the dating app Hinge. Their maybe old slogan, maybe current slogan. I don't know. I've been off the dating scene for a while, but they had a slogan that was designed to be deleted, right? So it's almost counterintuitive in and of the fact that you're building an application that you want users to be on, and you need users, you need daily active users spending money in order to make money, right? But the ultimate mission and the heart of the mission of Hinge is to make real matches and real connections. So designed to be deleted so that you can help and support and enforce. And I think um, what I've witnessed both, across from you and along your side in this journey is Animal Base takes a very similar approach where it's designed to help and support and inspire real action so that you don't spend thousands of hours a year following fads, right? And falling behind. But um, I'm interviewing you. I'm not answering the question. So we'll move on to the final questions we
I
wrap
agree
things up
with you.
here.
It's well said. Very well
Uh,
said.
the last thing I have for you, someone out there is listening to this. They're in a similar situation to you, whether it's building businesses and struggling, or just struggling with their health journey, what's real, and following fads, right? And not really coming across the aha moment of putting all of the pieces together. So, what advice would you give to that person listening to you today?
Well, I think you got to let yourself off the mat. Like, if you're like me and you're going to ebb and flow, and you're going to have days where you struggled and days where you relapse and don't do so well, the only for sure thing is that tomorrow will come. And so what? You've got to do something about it, right? Like, no matter what you did yesterday, no matter what you've done today, like tomorrow will come. And so you are going to have to face that down. You are going to have to live that reality. So just forget about all of that noise, and continue to optimize without thinking, oh my God, if I had started a week ago, and oh my God, if I had hit this goal and that goal. Like, it's one of those things where, like, life will happen. And if you spend too much time worrying about that and not taking the right actions and focusing on your habits and your day to day, like you're going to spend too much energy wasted. And so I think obviously that's one piece of the puzzle. You also, of course, have to try to be living to your whatever your values are, your ideals, whatever you believe. Like we talked a little bit about how if somebody tells you something is really black and white, maybe they're telling themselves. Well, at the same time, you have to balance the two things, right? Because you cannot use that as an excuse to not take action. Like if you have people who are like, "Oh, I should just be flexible because it doesn't really matter that much in the end anyways." Well, okay, if you have no goals and you don't care to make progress to anything, that may work. So you also have to look at what your goal is. If you're like me and you want to lose weight, or you want to gain weight, you want to have some outcome in your life, well then you do have to get really serious about how to achieve that outcome, right?
Yep.
It's not like somebody's advice of hey be really flexible and somebody's advice of hey be really strict is actually right or wrong. Like it depends on what you're trying to get out of it. And so a lot of people are trying to approach this in a blanket way, but it really is going to be different for the person. And it's not better or worse. It really depends on how is their life going and why and what are their goals for their life. And that's why we have to acknowledge that and not be so black and white about it, right? So if you're like me and you need to lose some weight and you need to undo some of the damages done from living the wrong way for years and years and years, well then yeah, let's do what I'm doing. And what I'm doing is I am prioritizing high quality meats and proteins. I am getting the grass fed beef and I am getting corn and soy free eggs and I am getting my raw dairy. You don't have to do all those things necessarily, but build a base, build a foundation of high nutrient dense foods. And then from there, optimize the other things, make sure you're getting in the gym, make sure you're working out a ton, make sure that you are trying to not overeat, even though you'll be more satiated from these foods. If you're like me, you can still eat a little bit too much of them, right? So make sure you're not doing that. But hey, if somebody was trying to gain weight, God forbid, like you might tell them something different, right? You might not tell them that same thing at all. So that's why I'm saying, like, to give advice is great, but also not everyone should take what I'm doing and do it. I think the advice needs to acknowledge where people are in their journey, right? And so I think that's what's lost with a lot of this black and white prescriptive advice that we see everywhere.
Very well said. Very well said. That's perfect. Well, you survived the interview. Now we can go back to our knowledge base. Um, I want to pull up, I want to switch gears here to a study actually within our knowledge base. It is focused on better balance tied to lower mortality risk in midlife and older age. And so I'll just read the summary here for our audience at home. Those who can read it, those who can, then we can dive into it for 5 or 10 minutes before wrapping up here. So this study, it focuses on the balance declines after midlife, increasing the risks of falls and poor health outcomes. The study examined whether the ability to complete a 10-second one-leg stance, defined as 10 SOLS, because everything has to sound scientific in these articles. It is data after all, is associated with all-cause mortality and whether it adds prognostic value beyond standard clinical measures. A total of 1,702 adults aged 51 to 75 were followed for a median of 7 years. About 20% were unable to complete the 10-second balance test. During the follow-up, mortality was significantly higher among those unable to perform the test. So about 17.5% among those who were not able to complete the test, while those that were able to complete the test, their mortality rate was at 4.6%. So survival was markedly worse in individuals failing the test. And after adjusting for age, sex, BMI, and comorbidities, apologies, I'll work on that pronunciation. uh, inability to complete the 10-second stand was associated with a higher risk of death. So I don't know. I think we gotta cut right out and cut back in and try this. I know we're not nearly at the age of this study, but it wouldn't surprise me if you did it lower to find very similar results. So this is
I'll
where we'll
take you
cut
up
in a
on that. Yeah, I'll take
quick
you
little
up on that.
test.
John, as a goalie, definitely has an unfair advantage, though I have scored on him a couple dozen times on the ice, so not that much of an advantage.
All right, here we go, Andrew. This is with a bad back, remember. Bad leg second.
2,000 years later.
There we
It'd be
go.
funny if correlation wasn't just, or if this was causation, not just correlation too. I mean, what if by not being able to stand, you like fall and died or something? I don't know. This is a weird study. It's like, obviously it doesn't imply causation, so it's like, but at the same time, wow. I mean, the physiology involved with this, it kind of makes sense. You would have just never thought it would have been something so random, but it's so telling, right? Because it's the little things like this too. I'm sure there's 100 other things like this that could be correlative to longevity, into mortality,
Right.
but not every day we see one like this, like a almost like a child's game, or like a weird athletic. Yeah, well, I don't know, Marcia. I don't even know if you can stand on one leg right now, so we'll
All
have
right.
to see if
Well,
your prognosis is not looking too good. So
we're not bringing my back pain into this. That's been that's premeditated for 11 years. All right, we're just treating it. We're treating it like healthily. Um,
uh,
no, but I think the interesting thing from this article is it's telling that balance is a well, we already knew balance was a proxy for neuromuscular health, coordination, and how well your body is actually functioning, not just how it looks in ways, right? So I think when we talk about the conversation of who's healthy and who's not, it's very easy to make a blanket statement assumption when you look at someone. But when we start to think of neuromuscular health, right, and how your brain functions with your body, which in effect is balance, right? But balance is a good measure of that. As a goalie, I'm well aware about how hard it is to do, especially you have to focus on one object if you want to efficiently balance versus watch a moving object. I
yeah.
think I like to challenge myself in like yoga sessions by looking around the room, following a butterfly. Not that I'm doing too much yoga outside these days, as we
I'd like
as
to
we
see
warm
the
up.
goalie version though, you know? Like I
Yeah,
wonder how goalies that can get into a butterfly position and up within 0.7 seconds had like a 20% lower mortality rate, you know? That kind of thing.
or career longevity, right? I feel like there's got to be some correlated tests in career longevity, and that actually makes me think of even just QBs in the NFL. You have some that last very long. Tom Brady, shout out. And then you have others that are just like in and out of the league because of
Yeah, that'd be
these
interesting.
are specimen athletes, but they haven't prioritized brain focus and neuromuscular health. So it's telling. Studies
Yeah.
like this are telling.
Yeah. Well, finally, shall we move to etc.
Let's
What do
wrap
you
it up with etc.
what do you got
Yeah,
for us this time?
I got first. Um, throwing me right on the spot. I get
I
it. I
know.
get it. I interviewed you for like
My
40
turn.
minutes. No, I think like one thing on off the top of my head today is I actually woke up today with a ton of energy. I was super stoked. I felt positive. I felt energetic, and I drink coffee every morning. I drink coffee today, but like a lot of mornings feel draining. What was interesting about today actually was, I was out in the sunlight pretty early. I woke up about an hour earlier than I usually do, more in line with my circadian rhythm. And I was active, lightly active. you mentioned it a little bit earlier, right? Like I'm going through PT for disc issues that I suffered over 11 years ago. They happen to be coming back right now, which is, in my opinion, just a function from working from home and not prioritize walking, right? Like any of these little things that would have happened if I was commuting to the office. And um, so when I'm doing PT again, and I was able to get to the physical therapist's office, and we did our exercises, and then I walked home. It was only a 15-minute walk home. Actually, wasn't that sunny out, but just like being outside, being off my phone, just walking, taking in the air, seeing the sunlight, like it was actually very, very positive. And I do wear an aura, right? Like, so I know my sleep score. My sleep score was better yesterday than it was today. I think my sleep score yesterday was a 94, while today was like at 76, something like that. And the reason it's 76 is the latency, how long it took me to fall asleep. But I still felt a lot better today than I felt yesterday. And mind you, is grind waking up, but it was the routine that actually made a lot of that feel better. At least that's what I'm crediting it with. And as you know, I just came back from a little while in Arizona where I spent over a week. And what was great about Arizona is I was purely on that circadian rhythm. Like I was waking up on Eastern time zone, so it was while working Pacific Coast hours. It was a lot easier to just wake up in the morning. It was a lot easier to wake up with the sun. I wasn't in a New England apartment, right? And I got out in the sun relatively frequently. Like I'd take some meetings outside. I would walk around outside, just soak up the sun and be more active. And my mood and productivity was so much higher when I incorporated that into my daily life. So now coming back here to New England and trying to find those practices that really energize me is super important. I'm glad I could find that today. I'm glad I could feel that today. Just something that going forward, I'm going to have to keep reporting on. And these et cetera segments is making sure I'm doing the right thing, hold myself accountable. But some worth noting today.
Yeah, it's so good to hear, man. I mean, especially what you're going through with some of the rehab. It's like just forcing yourself almost to have to do that with some appointment. Like,
Yeah.
hey, tomorrow, like I'll have to call you and tell you, make sure you go get outside, walk around a little
Yeah.
bit. And I mean, it's just so telling how you're right. I mean, starting the day off can change the trajectory of the whole day, change the trajectory of the whole week. Um, it's that type of day in, day out improvement and progress and focus that I think is lost on a lot of people. And like, there's only one thing you can do, which is do it right now.
Right.
And it's an upward spiral from there. So
Right.
no, man, love hearing that. And my et cetera is not so life altering and important.
I think I know what's going
All I've been focused on this week is I've had a little bit of mental fatigue because of just so many little to-dos.
Yeah.
So I asked my AI to help me sort out my travel schedule and make sure I'm actually sorting and thinking through things. I think I have maybe 20 trips I have to take this year because of business and personal. And so just trying to get all of the dates ironed out and get everything actually scheduled. It's almost like I'm on the road every other week for the year, and most weeks, most of the time it's in groups, right? So it'll be like 1 or 2 weeks in a row, and then maybe a week off, and then another 1 or 2 weeks, maybe even 3 or 4 weeks in a row. So yeah, it's just one of those. I don't have to count the number of calendar days I spend in hotels or Airbnbs this year. It feels like so. Just there's always, if I haven't booked a trip, right? There's this little thing in the back of my head that's distracting me. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm forgetting to do something, and it
Yeah.
kind of just. I found that it's almost like computer tabs or like loops that are open, and it's like the more tabs that you have unclosed that are still just kind of taking little energy from your mind add up. So I just felt like this week I had a lot of tabs I needed to close mentally, if that makes sense. So
Totally.
it's just one of those like make big lists, knock out as many of the little ones that may not matter that much, but at least by knocking them out, it's like you're not thinking about them and it makes it a little bit easier to do the other ones. So that's been my last few days for sure.
Yeah, I love that. And that's a topic we'll get into, I know, in the future, is the idea of closing your loops, because that is tied purely to rest, right? And I've suffered through that as well. Speaking of closing loops, I keep forgetting to ask you a question. My bachelor party, that Friday morning, you golfing with us or not? You haven't responded to the group text.
Hey, of course I am. Okay, you should have just known
Fantastic.
that. You have my schedule because we work together. So you should have. I just assume we're in telepathy and that I was exempt from responding to the group chat. No, I'm kidding. But part of it is right. I
And I've
am.
assumed you haven't booked it yet because you haven't asked your AI about that. So this is even. I don't know where you're coming
No,
in.
but a lot of it, like, there's a business conference next week where they do a golf day at the end of the conference, and I was gonna golf, and I'm not because I wasn't quite there when I had to make the choice with my
Right.
rehab on my torn shoulder labrum. But your trip is about a month after that, and I believe I will be a full participant. I'll be activated off the long-term injured reserve list, and I will be able to partake. So we're all set.
Sounds great. Sounds great. So I'll count you in, and even if you're not swinging the clubs, you will owe some birdie juice. So, and then
A
we can get into the pod
little bit
next
of
time
both. Yeah,
around
we'll
and
have to.
talk about
That's
that.
yeah, we'll have to save if calories in and out was a can of worms. I think alcohol is the second biggest can of worms, and I'm excited to open
Yep.
that one up next time. So
Amazing.
good deal.
Well, beautiful. We'll leave it there, and yeah, that's a wrap. Build Human Pod 2. See you guys next time.